Morning guys, it's 9 minutes past 11 and it's Saturday the 23rd of March 2019. Apologies about the lack of Friday Waffle last night. I was intending to do it. In fact, I was actually hoping to do a collaboration video with Lone Boys Post 1975, but unfortunately Dave had to go into work, so that was knocked in the head. Then I was going to do my Friday Waffle, but I ended up spending 3 hours doing expenses for my work. I've been putting off and putting off and putting off and putting off, and I ended up spending 3 hours doing them. It took me forever. I mean, it was about 8 o'clock before I actually finished, because trying to do them during the day is absolutely hopeless. It's just, you know, I'm too busy. So yeah, I ended up, it got to about 10 o'clock at night and I thought, you know, it's too late for the waffle, I'll do it tomorrow. So I'm not long back from the park run. Did the park run this morning. Actually not a bad day. Quite cold, quite, excuse me, sunny, but very, very cold. Cold wind. But at least the weather's definitely getting better. So anyway, I've got absolutely no structure to this waffle at all. What I was thinking, I don't want to, I'm really conscious that my Friday Waffles of late have been kind of non-gaming related, you know, which is fine, because at the end of the day, I've always been a talk about stuff, you know, it's not always gaming related, but I do want to try and get back to doing what I do. You know, people don't watch my channel to listen to me talking about my work, or talking about this, that and the next thing. You know, it's a video games channel. That's what it's always been. And like I say, it's not that I can't deviate from that now and again. But when you've been making waffles for, I don't know how many years, since 2013, 2014, it's a lot of waffles. I mean, it really is. It's something like 200 videos I've made now. And you think, you know, there is nothing else to talk about. I think the difficult thing for me is I'm not... I thought it was my phone going to ring there. I'm not, in fact, excuse me a little second, I've got a text message. Who's that from? What's that? Oh, I've got apparently the Domino's $5.99 mega week ends Sunday. To order a large pizza, tap domino's.co.uk. Piss off, Domino's. I've never ordered a Domino's. Not for years. Why is it sending me text messages? What was I talking about? Aye, so what I think the fact that I've not been really playing any video games recently, I don't tend to keep up to date with gaming news. So when you're not really involved, it's hard to kind of talk about games, if that makes any sense. So what I thought I would do is I'm just going to talk about the 8-bit machines and the impact, how much, not experience, what exposure I had to the 8-bit machines and what I thought of them back in the day. Now, this is not what I think of them now. In fact, no, I can touch on what I thought of it back in the day and what I think of it now. So, the very first computer that I ever saw, it was in my modern studies class at school, and it was a teacher called Mr. Waddle, who's sadly, he passed away a few years ago actually. He brought out this, it was, obviously we're doing the class, and he brought out this ZX81 computer, and the program that he was running, it basically flashed up words on the screen, and I can't remember exactly what you had to do, but it flashed a word up on the screen and I think you had to spell it, something like that. It was a very brief encounter, and at that point I didn't really know much about what it was. I knew it was a computer, but that was it. So that was my only sort of time I ever got to see a ZX81 until fairly recently. The other computer, there was 2 other computers that I got to use at school in my, was it geography? Yeah, it was my geography class actually. It was the Apple II, and the game that we got to play, it was just a game, we never got to do anything else in it, and it was a lemonade stand. Now that's quite a sort of famous little game that was out round about that time. Basically, you're in charge. Think Football Manager, but with lemonade. You've got your own little business. you've got so much money, you've got to decide how much sugar to put into the lemonade. The more sugar, the more expensive. How much advertising and how many bottles you're going to make. And what it would do is it would give you a little prediction of the weather. It would tell you tomorrow's going to be sunny. The predicted forecast is sunny. So you'd think to yourself, I need to make more lemonade because it's going to sell. And so there was all these different factors, and you basically had to try and make as much money as you could. It was actually quite good fun. I'll need to actually see if I can find it and do a 10-minute mashup of it. That would be quite good fun. So that was the only time I got to see an Apple II, you know, had the built-in screen and that kind of thing. The only other computer in school that I ever got to see was the BBC Micro. I did O-grade computers. I did pass it actually. I got a C for it, and you had to write basic programs. I mean, we never really got to. I don't think we ever really got to. We never got to play games. I remember once, I think it was like one of the last days at school, the teacher, who was a complete ogre. I mean, he was one of these teachers. When I look back now, he was a utter bully, especially in the early days. He used to be my geography teacher, and he was a complete horrible man. But then when I was a few years older, I took his computer studies, and he was actually alright. But yeah, when I look back now and think back now, he was a horrible person. But anyway, back on track. So yeah, BBC Micro, never got to play any games in it apart from this one day. I'm sure he showed us Elite. Yeah, I'm sure he loaded up Elite for us, but you had to write basic programs, and I always enjoyed that. That was the only time that I ever actually dabbled with basic. I mean, I used to kind of write. I think using the word "write" is sort of stretching it a little. I used to dabble with basic on my Commodore 64, but as anybody knows, the C64 basic is pretty crap. You know, you can't do very much with it. It's notoriously slow, and the only program that I ever actually wrote on it was guessing the number. You know, the computer would think a random number between 1 and 100, and then you would type in an answer, and it would say higher or lower. It was simple as that. That was only game that I ever actually wrote. There was nothing else. So yeah, the BBC, that was the only thing we used to get to use it for, what to program in BASIC. Then I'm trying to think. So that was the only time I really got to see computers was at school, and at that point it wasn't. I couldn't say it was something that made me think I want to get into this. It didn't make me want to go and buy a computer. I'm trying to think when my mind changed about computers. I started working part-time in Woolworths, which was like the big super department store version, not Woolworths, Woolco, which was the big mega. It was like a Walmart, but it was a Woolworths, but their version of like a huge big store. It sold everything. It sold sporting equipment. It sold carpets. It sold furniture. It even sold mopeds. It sold sporting equipment. It says furniture, jewellery, clothes, hi-fis, TVs, computers. It sold everything. I don't think there was anything it didn't sell. It didn't sell kitchen sinks, I have to say. But yeah, and I always remember, but this is before I started working part-time there, I always remember seeing the Vectrex. You know, that was back in the day when they had the Atari 2600. In fact, no, it wasn't Atari, it was the ColecoVision set up, and it was always Donkey Kong, because that was like the game that came packaged with it, and I always thought it looked amazing. Then they also had the Vectrex, and the Vectrex used to be set up in this little Vectrex display, which apparently you can sometimes get them on eBay. They go for stupid money, but it was a little plastic kind of cabinet thing that the Vectrex sat in, and I always remember looking at the Vectrex, and I never really quite knew what it was. Was it a game? Was it a computer? It was even back in 1983, it was like a quirky little thing. It wasn't something that ever crossed my mind that I would want to own. And it was a bizarre thing. Yeah, I remember. I never actually played it. They used to have Mindstorm running on it, and I says it did look interesting, but I was more interested in getting something that I could plug into my TV, like a ColecoVision or an Atari 2600, something I never ever did actually get. But yeah, it's quite funny because a lot of the games I've got about, I don't know, I've got about maybe 15 Vectrex games. They're all boxed with their plastic screens and whatnot. And some of the games actually, I bought them on eBay, but the person that bought them before me had bought them in Woolworths, and they got them for like 50 pence. Now, that is crazy. These games, any Vectrex game goes for, especially if it's boxed and complete. I mean, the boxes I've got aren't the greatest quality, but you know, the fact is the box is there, it's got the plastic screen, the overlay thing. These games go for 30 quid now, and this guy was getting them for like 50 pence, £1.50, and people now go, oh, why didn't you buy them? Why did you not buy it? But back in the day, I didn't want a Vectrex. You wouldn't have wanted a Vectrex. And it's like now, people, you can get Xbox 360 games for 50 pence. And probably in 20 years' time, people will say, you know, when people are paying daft money for 360 games, excuse me, Windy Pops, trademark Lone Boys Post. Yeah, people will look back at 2018 and say, why didn't you buy all these games, Alan, when they're only 50 pence, when they're worth £40 now? But it's easy, it's the old, you know, if you knew then what you know now, then you'd have bought them. But anyway, getting back on track, so the Vectrex was something that I saw, and I never played it. I didn't really know what it was or what it was about or anything, so it didn't really pique my interest, if I'm honest. And I'm trying to think how I got to know a few people when I was working, obviously, and I'm trying to actually think. Yeah, I remember the computer and the home computer course was a magazine which came out. It's one of these ones where, you know, well, it's a 24-part series, and it was basically, it came out because the whole home computer thing had just taken off. I mean, people going about the video game crash of, was it 1982? It didn't really happen in the UK because we didn't have consoles. Yeah, we had the Atari 2600, but in the UK we were more computer orientated as opposed to gaming consoles. So the video game crash didn't really happen for us. So this, you know, 1982, 1981, 1982, there were there was just an absolutely insane number of computers that were available. I mean, there was new computers coming out all the time. Now, it seems crazy because what have you got? You've got a PC or an Apple. That's about your two computers. You've got, gaming console wise, yeah, what have you got? You've got your Xbox, Xbox One, whatever it is, your PS4, and you've got your Nintendo, and that's the three companies. But back in 1981, 82, 83, there were so many computers. I mean, I'm doing this from memory. I mean, you had, what did you have? You had the Lynx, you had the MSX, you had the BBC, you had the Atari 400, the Atari 800, you had the Texas, you had the Jupiter Ace, you had the Auric Atmos, you had the Spectrum, you had the VIC-20, you had the Commodore 64. There were so many computers, and it was a question of what one to buy. You know, some of the best looking computers weren't always the best computers, if that made any sense. And in my mum and dad's wisdom, I decided, my mum and dad had bought me this magazine, and I thought, I really want a computer, because they weren't going to get me an Atari 2600. So they decided, I really wanted the Commodore 64, but I knew there was no way I was going to get one. So they took me to Comet, which was it was like a kind of big electrical warehouse thing. They took me to Comet this one day, and I knew I wasn't going to get a C64, so I thought, could I maybe get a Spectrum? But they happened upon the Texas TI-994A, because it looked like a nice computer, and it does. It's shiny, it's got a nice black keyboard, it's got this kind of not flush, shiny aluminium backing. It did look really nice. Compared to the Spectrum, it looked like a professional computer. So my dad says, look, will we buy this one? And I wasn't really wanting that one, but you know what, I thought, yeah, okay. So I got it, and to say I was disappointed was an understatement. I only ever had one game for it, which was shit. Yeah, and my mate wrote a game for me. He wrote Defender, although the game wasn't finished. There wasn't, in fact, I think, yeah, there was baddies that would kind of come in from the right hand side you could shoot, but so I only had one game, which was crap, plus a game that my mate wrote, and that was it. But when I started this part-time job, I got to know a few people, and I ended up palling about with them. And this one guy, he had a Commodore 64, and I think I went up to his house and I saw it, and I knew then, I thought, this is what I want. This is what I want to buy. So I took out, it was interest-free credit, and I bought this Commodore 64 on hire purchase. Yeah, it was something like £15 a month. It was about 2 weeks wages for me back then. So I had this Commodore 64, and you know, I got to know quite a few people with Commodore 64s. And at that point, there was a computer club. It was in a school that was quite close to me, and it was every Wednesday. And this was before I had a car. I mean, I could drive. I passed my driving test when I was 17. And on occasions, my dad would let me borrow his car, but he really didn't like me borrowing it at all. Can't think why. So 9 times out of 10, when I was going to computer club with my mate Grant, he had a Spectrum. Yeah, in fact, I've kind of jumped a wee bit. So yeah, I had a Commodore 64, and my mate Grant, I got to know him through school. He had a Spectrum, and I knew I'd seen the Spectrum. I'd obviously seen the Spectrum in, you know, John Menzies' window. They always had. What did they have? They had Bugaboo the Flea. It was always running on the computer. And then eventually it became the game of choice in the shop window was Back to School. Back to School? School Days. School Days. Back to School was the sequel, I think. Yeah, that was always a game that had running on the Spectrum. So yeah, I went up to Grant's house and I saw the Spectrum, and my initial impression was like, this is I'm going to try and not swear, because I think when I swear I'd instantly demonetize a video, or I make it that it can't be viewed in certain countries. So I was immediately disappointed with what the Spectrum was. I mean, I had this Commodore 64, which had a professional keyboard, full-size keyboard, graphics, sound were amazing, and then here was this little black thing with like a dead flesh keyboard. It wasn't even a proper keyboard. The sound was non-existent. The games looked terrible. There was colour clash all over the place. It just looked a mess, and I couldn't believe that people were going on about how good this machine was. When I actually saw it, I thought, this is terrible. And I never really changed my opinion of the Spectrum until years later when I actually bought one myself. But yeah, I used to, you know, I had my Commodore 64, and I would be, you know, Bruce Lee, Beachhead 2, Impossible Mission. These were all stunning games on the C64, and then I looked at them on the Spectrum and I just thought, they're woeful, they're absolutely awful. How could people get enthused and excited about a dreadful computer? It really was, it was dreadful. But then, of course, games started to come out on the Spectrum that made me start to think, oh, things like obviously Night Lore, there was Underworld, there was all these, I can't remember what they were called, arcade adventures I think they were, where you're running about picking up things. Attic Attack, always thought Attic Attack looked really nice. There was games like Cobra. There was various games, but the one genre for me that really made me quite jealous of my mate and his Spectrum was the 3D you know, your Nightlore, your Sweevo's World, your Batman, all these kind of games, you know, I couldn't, the C64 simply could not do. I know that's not the case now. I mean, there's Nightlore was recently released on the C64 and it's a cracking version. I would say it's almost just as good as the Spectrum one, if not as good. But back then, I just thought the Spectrum was awful. 20, 30 years on, I've had Spectrums for quite a few years now, and I now know that the Spectrum is an ace little computer. Is it a better computer than the Commodore 64? I don't know. I'm always going to be biased because I had a C64. It was my first computer, and I would always choose the C64 over the Spectrum. But dearie me, there are some awesome games in the Spectrum. I mean, just ridiculously playable games. You know, stuff like your Manic Miners, your Bear Bother, Chucky Egg, you know, Nightlore. There's loads of Trash Man. There's loads of really quirky little games that simply they just work better on the Spectrum. I mean, some of the Joffa Smith, who, you know, sadly he's no longer here. He really got to grips with the Spectrum. He was able to make it sing. He could make it dance. The graphics were astonishing in his games, and in the right hands, the Spectrum was a wonderful machine. It's always, I think, for the Spectrum, it was always about gameplay over graphics. I mean, the Spectrum had I think it did have. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm rubbish when it comes to technical stuff. I'm sure the Spectrum could output at a higher resolution than the Commodore 64, and so most of the games were, I was going to say black and white, or monochrome, or maybe black and yellow, whatever. They were kind of, you know, there was never a lot of colour in Spectrum games, so that did change. I mean, was it Dan Dare 3? Have a look at Dan Dare 3, that's an incredible looking game. No Colour Clash, awesome looking game. But yeah, the Spectrum, you got used to it being monochrome, but it could do 3D way better than the C64 because the processor was quicker, and because it was monochrome, the graphics were almost higher resolution. And it pains me to say this, but in most cases, the Spectrum graphics, especially for arcade conversions, always looked better than the C64. That wasn't always the case. I mean, there were some, you know, some amazing arcade games in the C64. But yeah, I've learned to love the Spectrum. You know, if I was going to rate the C64 out of 10 as a home computer, I would say it was a solid 8, and I would maybe say the Spectrum was a solid 7.5. You know, that's my opinion. The Spectrum was a wonderful machine, but back in the day, I didn't like it. BBC, apart from my brief foray when I was at school programming basic programs, the only person that I knew that had a BBC was a guy that I used to know from school. I knew him, I kind of grew up with him. He had a BBC, but he never really played games in it. For him, it was always, he showed me, is it the teletext? You could go on, is it Oracle or something it was called? You could basically, because like the teletext and CFAX, which was it was like the early internet back in the sort of late 70s, 80s. It used to, I think they used the BBC computer to do it, and it was like like I said, it was like the early internet. So this guy used to kind of use his for like online things. It was like really basic internet. So he never really had any games. So I never ever got to see the BBC as a gaming platform. I mean, the thing is, it was ridiculously expensive at the time. I mean, it was maybe £300 when you could get a Commodore 64 for 200, and you could get a Spectrum for 150. So yeah, the BBC was, it was I always think about the C64 was owned by, this is how people perceive it, the C64 was owned by people who had money. They had a wee bit more money. Slightly spoiled kids got Commodore 64s. The ragtag kids on the street owned Spectrums, and then the extremely wealthy people owned BBCs. But yeah, the BBC was never really a gaming machine for me. However, I now own one. I've owned one for quite a few years. I've obviously played quite a few games with emulators. The BBC, it's, to my mind, it's not a great gaming computer. There are one or two games that are awesome on it. I mean, is it Revs, which I've never really played much, but I do know it's a much revered game, driving game. Elite, I always think that the BBC Elite is probably the best one. Although apparently the Archimedes is the best original version of Elite to play. But the BBC is a nice computer, but I never really, it's not the powerhouse for games that, you know, the Spectrum or the Commodore 64 was. So yeah, BBC, I didn't have any real experience of it at all back in the day. But owning one now, it is a nice machine, but it's not one that I really play all that often. Amstrad, the only time I ever saw an Amstrad was my mate Mark. He had one, I had my C64. Mark he got the one with the colour screen, and the only game that I got to play, there was two games that he got with it at Christmas time. It was Blagger, which I had on the Commodore 64, and what was the other game? Steve Davis Snooker. Now, Snooker was a game that I always wanted to have a good version of in the C64. Sadly, there was never really a good version. Steve Davis Snooker did come out in the Commodore 64, and it wasn't bad, but it wasn't particularly good either. But this version on the Amstrad was really good. You could have the really sort of precise movement, and, you know, for lining up shots, and so it was excuse me, it was possible to actually play it pretty well. So that was the only two games that I got to see in Amstrad. And Mark didn't have the computer for long. He got rid of it, excuse me. So I never really I maybe played it 3 or 4 times all in, and then I never saw an Amstrad again until, I don't know, 2010, something like that, when I eventually bought one. And I then sold it. I had the one with the colour screen. I had quite a few games on tape, and then I sold it because I didn't have any room for it, and I sold it for like 60 quid. Crazy. And that was only maybe 4 years ago. And then I never had one. Then I got the chance of the Amstrad. I didn't have the screen. I bought the Amstrad unit, but I didn't have any way of playing it. In fact, I tell a lie, I had the BBC, I had the TV modulator thing. There was a proper Amstrad one, but it didn't work properly, so it ended up sitting in a cupboard, not getting used. And then, when would it be? About a year ago, I got the chance of a colour monitor. I bought one for a £5 off one of my mates, and sadly, about a month ago, I was using it and it popped. The smoke came out it, so the monitor was retired to landfill a few weeks ago. But, excuse me, but I did buy one of these SCART connectors, so I can now use the Amstrad on my TV. But the Amstrad is a bit of a mystery to me. It's probably the most unused computer I've had, just because it always needed its own screen to be, you know, set up. I've obviously played quite a few games on emulators when I'm doing, you know, 10-minute mashups and Arcade Perfect my arses. I have played quite a few Amstrad games. There seems to be no middle ground with Amstrad games. They're either brilliant or they're complete crap. But like I says, I've not really had the chance to play. I do have a GX4000, and through the wonders of clever people, there's a really clever chap, Phantom. I can't remember what his second is. He goes by the name of Phantom on the intraweb. He very cleverly has been converting games, Amstrad computer games, to run on the GX4000. If you don't know what the GX4000 is, it was basically Alan Sugar's Mega Drive. It was an Amstrad CPC 464. I think it's got 128k memory, and it was a console, and it was a massive flop. I think there was only 26 games came out for it, but there's this little device which I've bought, and it basically allows me to put an SD card into this thing, and this clever guy, Phantom, or Phantoms I think it is, I can't remember exactly what his name is. He very cleverly has been converting all these Amstrad games to run in this console. So I have been getting a bit more exposure to the Amstrad, but out of all the computers I own, it's probably the one I have kind of least, maybe second least. I think that the BBC is probably the one that I've had the least kind of exposure to, then the Amstrad. But no, I know the Amstrad's an amazing machine. I mean, my mate Novabug, Chris, is a huge Amstrad fan, and there's some, I've been watching Chris's videos, there's some amazing games out there. Atari. Now, the Atari is a strange one. Atari, the Atari 800 came out, I think, something like 1978. It was before its time. Then they brought out the Atari 400. Now, I actually own an Atari 400 and an Atari 800, and I've also got an Atari XL, and I've also got an Atari 130 XE, I think it is. And the Ataris are awesome. Now, going back to this computer club that I used to go to, there were the Commodore 64 owners. There was quite a few. Then it was all the older kids that kind of owned the C64. Then you got the snotty nosed little kids that owned the Spectrum. There was loads of Spectrum owners, and all they did was copy games. We did the same thing. We used to copy games, and they would copy games. Then there was you never got any BBC owners. But then there was always this one guy that used to come along with his an Atari, and it's a bizarre thing. And nobody ever spoke to him. The guy actually was kind of he always had a kind of birth defect in his face. It made him look quite strange, and for that reason, people used to avoid him. And I used to say hello to him. You know, he was quite an aggressive person, I think, because probably he'd been bullied, whatever, just because of his kind of facial, defect. But he had this Atari, and nobody really spoke to him. And I used to walk past when I was going to the canteen to get chips and a cup of tea, whatever, and he would always be playing. It was either Stealth, which came out from Broderburn Software, Ball Blazer, and maybe Rescue and Fractalis. And I always used to look at like Stealth. It had the better colours. I mean, I had Stealth in the C64, but it just looked so much better in the Atari. But I never told him that, because back then it was very much my computer's better than yours sort of thing. So I didn't really have any. I never played the guy's computer. And then it was a few years later, my mate, I got in tow with a bunch of guys, and one of the guys, he had an Atari XL, and again, he never really had many games for it, so I didn't really get to use the Atari. The computer shop that I used to go to, which I've spoke about many times, and I'm not going to go into details now. It was an Italian guy, opened up this computer shop back in the early 80s. It was before computers were even a thing, before, you know, your big mainstream shops were selling them. He was an Atari dealer. He eventually started like stocking Commodore 64 and Spectrum games, but by and large it was all Atari. And I used to go up on a Saturday morning, and I would spend, I wouldn't say I spent all day, but I would go up there on a Saturday and I would spend maybe 3-4 hours in the shop just looking at the games. He would have maybe 2 or 3 Atari 800s running, he'd have an Atari 400, and it was all American software. It was your Bruce Lee, your Fort Apocalypse, Blue Max, Boulder Dash, Summer Games, and these games were like jaw-dropping. And this was like before sort of Commodore 64 really came out, and you know, and it was amazing. And the problem with Atari was, because it was out so early on, it was ridiculously expensive, so people couldn't really afford them. I mean, Atari was massive in the States. Everybody had a floppy drive, but in the UK they were just too expensive. And the problem with the Atari, probably a bit like the C64, was the games, especially on tape, were ridiculously they literally did take 20 minutes to load. I mean, can you imagine waiting for 20 minutes to load a game? It literally did take that length of time. So most of the good Atari software came out in floppy disk, But in the UK, we didn't have floppy disks, so we were limited to tapes, and because of that, it never really took off. The Atari never really became popular in the UK. So again, after the computer club kind of disappeared, I never really saw the Atari, I never really knew anything about it. And then when I eventually got emulators, I started to get to play Atari games. And like I said, I've now got 3 or 4 Atari machines. The Atari, I would probably say the C64 is my favourite 8-bit machine. But I would probably say that the Atari is the most impressive 8-bit machine. It's got quite a quick processor, I think, or I might be talking crap. But it had an amazing colour palette. Now you compare, now this is maybe unfair, I was going to say compare Fort Apocalypse on the Commodore 64 with the Atari one. The Atari one would blow the C64 one out of the water, but then that's because programmers had got to grips with Atari hardware, whereas the C64 back then was still quite a new thing, so they were still getting kind of used to it. But yeah, the Atari has got some amazing, it's got an amazing colour palette. I mean, I always remember famously Archer McLean, now I think it was issue 1 of Zap magazine, which was a C64 magazine. They were interviewing Archer McLean, talking to him about Drop Zone, and he said that they were asking, not Drop Zone, they were asking him about, oh, how good is the Commodore 64, and he went, it's a great machine, and na, but the Atari is so much better, and that upset a lot of people, because when you've just bought a brand new computer, and you buy a magazine dedicated to this computer, you don't want to hear somebody say that the computer that you don't own is actually better. So yeah, he upset a few people, but the Atari is an amazing machine. Like I said, I do play it. I've not got it wired up. I've not actually got it connected up at the moment. I'll need to get that sorted. But yeah, the Atari, I love it. I absolutely love it. It's got an amazing, it's got good sound. Not as good as the SID chip, obviously. Good sound. It's got amazing graphics when it's done properly. But again, the Atari is a bit like the Amstrad. Some of the games are just incredible, and some of the conversions on the Atari are just downright woeful. I don't know why that's the case, but yeah, the Atari, I love it to bits. Any other home computers? ZX81 never had any real dealings with. One of the computers which I've never really played it, I've got no real experience of it, is the Commodore VIC-20. I do have a VIC-20, but I don't have any means of loading games into it. No, I don't. So, I mean, again, I've got the emulators, but I never really think that playing games via emulation gives you a true flavour of the game, true flavour of the computer. You've got to be able to sit in front of the computer and use a proper joystick. So, considering how much I regard myself as a bit of a computer historian, especially 8-bit machines, I don't have any knowledge or experience or nostalgia for the VIC-20, because I jumped straight into the Commodore 64. I think if I'd got into the hobby 2 years earlier, maybe even a year earlier, I may have got a VIC-20, because a couple of my mates had them, and again, I never really got to play them. But there are some awesome games out there for the VIC-20, like Grid Runner and Matrix by Jeff Minter. Just awesome games. So let me think. I think that's about it. There's a lot of other machines like the Auric Atmos. My mate Ian had one. Again, it was a very brief 40. He had a couple of games for it, but I wasn't really impressed with it at all. But no, that is it. That's kind of it. Yeah, like I said, ZX81 never had any dealings with it. The Commodore 64, I had one back in the day. Love it to bits, still enjoy it. The Spectrum I thought was crap. I absolutely thought it was an awful machine back in the day. But 20 years, 30 years on, I realise it is an amazing machine. I love it to bits. I really like the Spectrum. The Spectrum is up there with the Commodore 64 in my opinion. Amstrad, again, I never had much dealings with it back in the day. But I need to get into it more. I need to start using it a bit more, because it is a lovely machine. There's no question of it. It says watching Chris's videos, there's some cracking games out there for it. BBC, again, don't have much experience with it. I do own one. I would love to be able to set it up somewhere and actually use it. I always maintained when I got my own sort of decent sized gaming room like I've got now, that I would wheel out a computer and plug it in for maybe, you know, 6 months, not 6 months, maybe a month, and play it. I could actually do that. Yeah, I mean, I've got my my Amiga monitor behind me, but I could quite easily, if I let you have a look, maybe not. I mean, I could technically get a T. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing. Where I've got my Commodore Amiga, I could technically put a TV there. I don't know. I'll need to think about it. I might need to do that. But yeah, BBC, don't have much experience of it. Again, it's a lovely machine, but I need to try and make more of an effort to kind of use it. Same with Atari. The Atari is a great machine. I'd love to have an Atari set up permanently, because it's an awesome, awesome machine. So, listen, I'm just conscious, that's 40 minutes in. I was going to be answering questions, but I think what I'm going to do, guys, is the questions that you asked me last week, I'm going to park and I'm going to answer them next week. I'm quite happy that I've managed to wheedle out a 40-minute waffle of me actually talking about games for a change, because I think, yeah, I have been getting a bit dark and moody with my videos talking about stuff, and I do want to try and kind of get back to gaming again. So yeah, hopefully this is kind of a return to an old waffle, because I do want to get back to it. That's what this channel is about. I've still got a couple of videos. I'll be putting out another few videos next week as well. So anyway, guys, I'm going to get going. It's now 10 to 12. I need to go and jump into a shower because I am stinky. I may, don't quote me on this, I may try and do a live gaming stream at some point. Maybe tomorrow night, or maybe next week. Don't hold me on it. I will put out on Facebook or something if I'm going to be doing it. Yeah, anyway, listen, guys, I'm going to get off. As always, thank you very, very much for all your continued support. I always do appreciate it. I really, really, really do. Keep the comments coming in, guys, and I do apologise for being a complete twat for not taking time to reply to comments. It's just with things going on at the moment, you know, I think you would rather see me make videos than reply to comments. I will hopefully get back to doing that normal. But anyway, guys, as always, take care and thank you very, very much for watching.